Mondofine, night train to the end, running hard and running fast to meet my future and away from my past, taking the gamble that cannot last, night train to the end.
Welcome to Frater SH Night Show. I am your host Sir Peter Pendragon, and this is the show about all things weird and strange. We have a very unique lineup for you on this show. We have UFO reports, ghost reports, and classic science fiction pulp stories told from magazines such as Amazing Stories. A book I wish to tell you about is Robert Hunter's Occult Exposed Omnibus. The Occult Omnibus looks at what happened after the events of the Tower of Babel. The Babylonian religion continued on. This book looks at symbology but also there 4 great cults that hide in our religions. Once the reader is familiar with these cults, they will learn about Jesus Christ and how he can save them. You can find this book at www.lulu.com/spotlight/fratersh. The works of Sederingrad Productions. We recommend our Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 that is quite popular and attempts to bring the Book of Enoch back into the Bible's list of books. Also check out the list of links that includes videos made for VidMe, BitChute, DTube, YouTube and more. First a word about Sederingrad Productions and then we will have paranormal news.
Welcome to Sederingrad Productions. We specialize in spiritual books, comic books and old public domain books that have long been forgotten. We also have done artwork for war, history books and fiction-based works. We recommend our Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 that is quite popular and attempts to bring the Book of Enoch back into the Bible's list of books. The Ethiopic Holy Bible Volume 1 also has a few selections from Josephus, a Jewish historian. And also the book has Jubilees and the Apocrypha, which is also available in Catholic Bibles. Frater SH is an esoteric researcher who is out to reveal ancient knowledge, both known and forbidden. Frater SH has appeared on Joshua P. Warren's Speaking of Strange, Kevin Smith's show, UFO Show, and Ghost Chronicles International with Ron Clerk and Richard Felix, the historian from Most Haunted on the Travel Channel. You can find Frater's Conspiracy Spirituality store at http://www.lulu.com/spotlight/fratersh.
Welcome back, and now paranormal news. Michigan witness reports low-flying triangles. By Roger Marsh. A Michigan witness at Lennon reported watching and videotaping 3 massive, triangular-shaped crafts that hovered under 100 feet off the ground, according to testimony in case 84251 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The reporting witness was in a vehicle moving along Corona Road when he had the feeling he was being watched on June 8, 2017. As we broke the tree line, I noticed 3 lights in the sky from this distance I was at. The witness stated. It looked to be no more than 70-80 feet between the 3 lights. As we drove by, my mother stopped the vehicle to gain a better view. I began feeling mortified, and terror consumed me. The craft hovered ominously, making no sound, pulsating a flurry of colors. Aviation mechanic unable to identify sphere-shaped object. By Roger Marsh. An Ohio witness at Manning County reported watching and photographing a sphere-shaped object crossing the sky, according to testimony in case 84308 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. Witness Reporting Database. The witness stepped outside at 10:07 p.m. on June 10, 2017, when the incident occurred. Went out to grab my cell phone charger out of scooter glove box and saw this object or objects hauling ass across the sky, the witness stated. Only had a little bit of time to snap a picture and a bit of video, but appeared to be more than one before I lost sight when the line of trees got in the way. Ohio witness drives past hovering UFO. Picture by Roger Marsh. An Ohio witness at Delphos is trying to understand why he drove by a hovering UFO and did not stop to investigate, according to testimony in case 83981 from the Mutual UFO Network. MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The incident occurred about 3:45 p.m. on November 20, 2016. I was driving home from work in Delphos, the witness stated. I looked up below the trees and saw a black and gray, or silver, squared, cubical shape with the top right cut out about 8 to 10 feet in size, just hovering or vibrating. Triangle UFO quickly disappears over small Ohio town. By Roger Marsh. An Ohio witness at Batavia described a triangle-shaped object with 3 lights at its points, moving directly overhead with no flashing lights or sound, according to testimony in case 83789. From the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The witness was outside in a front yard with a dog on a clear night at 9:45 p.m. on May 16, 2017. When the incident began, I immediately noted how many stars I could see in the darkness of the sky, the witness stated. While standing on the driveway and shortly after looking up, I saw the object come over my roof into view. It appeared to be several thousand feet up in the sky. I could easily make out 3 distinct, white lights in a perfect triangular pattern. Arizona witness describes 6 hovering discs. By Roger Marsh. An Arizona witness traveling by train through Apache County reported watching and photographing 6 hovering, 2-story objects beaming light to the ground level, according to testimony. In case 83376 from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The case was reported for the witness, who had the experience on April 14, 2017. My mother was traveling through the Arizona desert via train, on her way to Texas, she stated. She was unable to sleep due to movement of the train. She said she was looking out of their cabin window and saw a very bright light that became brighter as the train approached. Witness describes huge rectangle UFO under 500 feet. By Roger Marsh. A California witness at Oval reported watching a large, rectangle-shaped object moving overhead under 500 feet that emitted a low humming sound, according to testimony in case 83386. From the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, Witness Reporting Database. The reporting witness and his wife were sitting on their front porch on April 15, 2017, when the event occurred. I observed 2 lights in the sky that were moving at us from the north, the witness stated. I told my wife to take a look. The lights seemed to be fixed and very large. I would say about the size of tires or bigger. Now ghost reports. Visalia, California ghost sightings. We lived in a house on N 4th Avenue and Grape Street. The house that used to be the burned to the ground many years before. A woman and 2 little kids died in the fire because they were trapped by the bars on the windows. A new owner built a new house to rent out. We lived there for 15 years. At night when you were half asleep half awake you would hear the children screaming and crying, but when you woke up all the way it was quiet. We sometimes saw a woman in the living room. She was Mexican and about 30 years old. She was in a nightgown, and she looked like she was sad. Sometimes she was looking like she was looking for something, I think probably her little ones. She never made sounds. We just saw her. She was there for a time, and then she was just disappeared. We never saw the children. We only heard them. Sometimes things moved. Sometimes we heard noise like someone walking on a wood floor. The new house has concrete foundation. When you would be in the bathroom you would hear noise like things being moved, but nothing was moved. Sometimes we would feel scared for no reason. Just scared. Sometimes our dog would not go in any rooms, and the rooms were cold then. We moved, and other people live there now. Submitted by Hernandez. Patricksburg, Indiana ghost sightings. I lived in a house on Strong Street, Patricksburg, Indiana. The kitchen was the original train depot. Patricksburg was originally called Lancaster, but was renamed Patricksburg after a man named Patrick who laid the railroads. My family, the Strongs, bought the building as a summer home, but eventually moved there and added on. My 9 aunts and uncles lived there, as I was also raised there. What I saw and dealt with in that house, that town, was not ghosts. It was pure evil. Demons. And yes, plural. The kinds of things one would see in a movie like Paranormal Activity are just the kinds of things that happened to me over the years. This post will be left as is. And now a classic pulp story. Off on a Comet by Jules Verne. Chapter 6. The captain makes an exploration. Hector Servadac was not the man to remain long unnerved by any untoward event. It was part of his character to discover the why and the wherefore of everything that came under his observation, and he would have faced a cannonball the more unflinchingly from understanding the dynamic force by which it was propelled. Such being his temperament, it may well be imagined that he was anxious not to remain long in ignorance of their cause of the phenomena which had been so startling in their consequences. We must inquire into Thith 3 tomorrow, he exclaimed, as darkness fell suddenly upon them. Then, after a pause, he added, that is to say, if there is to be a tomorrow, for if I were to be put to the torture, I could not tell what has become of their son. May I ask, sir, what we're to do now? Put in Ben Zoof. Stay where we are for the present, and when daylight appears, if it ever does appear, we will explore the coast to the west and south, and return to the Gobi. If we can find out nothing else, we must at least discover where we are. Meanwhile, sir, may we go to sleep? Certainly, if you like, and if you can. Nothing loath to avail himself of his master's permission, Ben Zoof crouched down in an angle of the shore, threw his arms over his eyes, and very soon slept the sleep of the ignorant, which is often sounder than the sleep of the just. Overwhelmed by the questions that crowded up on his brain, Captain Servadac could only wander up and down the shore. Again and again he asked himself what the catastrophe could portend. Had the towns of Algiers, Oran, and Mostaganem escaped the inundation? Could he bring himself to believe that all the inhabitants, his friends, and comrades had perished, or was it not more probable that the Mediterranean had merely invaded the region of the mouth of the Shelif? But this supposition did not in the least explain the other physical disturbances. Another hypothesis that presented itself to his mind was that the African coast might have been suddenly transported to their equatorial zone. But although this might get over the difficulty of the altered altitude of the sun and the absence of twilight, yet it would neither account for the sun setting in the east, nor for their length of the day being reduced to 6 hours. "We must wait till tomorrow," he repeated, adding, for he had become distrustful of the future. That is to say, if tomorrow ever comes. Although not very learned in astronomy, Server Dak was acquainted with the position of the principal constellations. It was therefore a considerable disappointment to him that, in consequence of their heavy clouds, not a star was visible in the firmament. To have ascertained that the pole star had become displaced would have been an undeniable proof that the Earth was revolving on a new axis. But not a rift appeared in the lowering clouds, which seemed to threaten torrents of rain. It happened that the moon was new on that very day. Naturally, therefore, it would have set at their same time as the sun. What, then, was the captain's bewilderment when, after he had been walking for about an hour and a half, he noticed on their western horizon a strong glare that penetrated even the masses of the clouds, the moon in the west. He cried aloud, but suddenly bethinking himself, he added, "But no, that cannot be the moon, unless she has shifted very much nearer the earth. She could never give a light as intense as this." As he spoke, the screen of vapor was illuminated to such a degree that the whole country was, as it were, bathed in twilight. "What can this be?" soliloquized the captain. "It cannot be the sun, for the sun set in the east only an hour and a half ago. Would that those clouds would disclose what enormous luminary lies behind them. What a fool! I was not to have learnt more astronomy. Perhaps off on a comet." 13. After all, I am racking my brain over something that quite in the ordinary course of nature. But, reason as he might, the mysteries of their heavens still remained impenetrable. For about an hour some luminous body, its disk evidently of gigantic dimensions, shed its rays upon the upper strata of the clouds, then, marvelous to relate, instead of obeying the ordinary E or 3 of celestial mechanism, and descending upon the opposite horizon, it seemed to retreat farther off, grew dimmer, and vanished. The darkness that returned to the face of their earth was not more profound than the gloom which fell upon the captain's soul. Everything was incomprehensible. The simplest mechanical rules seemed falsified. The planets had defied the laws of gravitation. The motions of the celestial spheres were erroneous as those of a watch with a defective mainspring, and there was reason to fear that their sun would never again shed his radiance upon their earth. But these last fears were groundless. In 3 hours' time, without any intervening twilight, their morning sun made its appearance in the west, and day once more had dawned. On consulting his watch, Servadac found that night had lasted precisely 6 hours. Ben-Zoof, who was unaccustomed to so brief a period of repose, was still slumbering soundly. "Come, wake up," said Servadac, shaking him by the shoulder. "It is time to start." "Time to start?" exclaimed Ben-Zoof, rubbing his eyes. "I feel as if I had only just gone to sleep." "You have slept all night, at any rate," replied the captain. "It has only been for 6 hours, but You must make it enough. Enough it shall be, sir, was the submissive rejoinder. And now, continued Servadac, we will take the shortest way back to the Gorbey, and see what our horses think about it all. They will think that they ought to be groomed, said the orderly. Very good, you may groom them and saddle them as quickly as you like. I want to know what has become of the rest of Algeria. If we cannot get round by the south to Mostaganem, we must go eastwards to Tens. And forthwith they started. Beginning to feel hungry, they had no hesitation in gathering figs, dates, and oranges from the plantations that formed a continuous rich and luxuriant orchard along their path. The district was quite deserted, and they had no reason to fear any legal penalty. In an hour and a half they reached the Gorbey. Everything was jugged as they had left it, and it was evident that no one bad visited the place during their absence. All was desolate as the shore they had quitted. The preparations for the expedition were brief and simple. Ben Zoof saddled the horses and filled his pouch with biscuits and game. Water, he felt certain, could be obtained in abundance from there numerous affluents of the Shilif, which, although they had now become tributaries of the Mediterranean, still meandered through the plain. Captain Servadac mounted his horse Zephyr, and Ben Zoof simultaneously got astride his mare Galette, named after the mill of Montmartre. They galloped off in the direction of the Shilif, and were not long in discovering that the diminution in the pressure of the atmosphere had precisely the same effect upon their horses as it had had upon themselves. Their muscular strength seemed 5 times as great as hitherto, their hoofs scarcely touched the ground, and they seemed transformed from ordinary quadrupeds into veritable hippogriffs. Happily, Servadac and his orderly were fearless riders. They made no attempt to curb their steeds, but even urged them to still greater exertions. 20 minutes sufficed to carry them over the 4 or 5 miles that intervened between the Gorbey and the mouth of the Shilif. Then, slackening their speed, they proceeded at a more leisurely pace to the southeast, along what had once been the right bank of the river, but which, although it still retained its former characteristics, was now the boundary of a sea, which, extending farther than the limits of the horizon, must have swallowed up at least a large portion of the province of Oran. Captain Servadac knew the country well. He had at one time been engaged upon a trigonometrical survey of the district, and consequently bad an accurate knowledge of its topography. His idea now was to draw up a report of his investigations. To whom that report should be delivered was a problem he had yet to solve. During the 4 hours of daylight that still remained, the travelers rode about 21 miles from the river mouth. To their vast surprise, they did not meet a single human being. At nightfall, they again encamped in a slight bend of the shore, at a point which on the previous evening had faced the mouth of the Mena, one of the left-hand affluents of the Shilif, but now absorbed into the newly revealed ocean. Ben Zoof made the sleeping accommodation as comfortable as the circumstances would allow. The horses were hobbled and turned out to feed upon the rich pasture that clothed the shore, and the night passed without special incident. At sunrise on the following morning, the 2nd of January, or what, according to the ordinary calendar, would have been the night of the 1st, the Cap captain and his orderly remounted their horses, and during the 6 hours they accomplished a distance of 42 miles. The right bank of the river still continued to be the margin of the land, and only in one spot had its integrity been impaired. This was about 12 miles from the Mina, and on the site of the annex or suburb of Sakelmitu. Here a large portion of the bank had been swept away, and the hamlet, with its 800 inhabitants, had no doubt been swallowed up by the encroaching waters. It seemed, therefore, more than probable that a similar fate had overtaken their larger towns beyond the Shelif. In the evening the explorers encamped, as previously, in a nook of the shore which here abruptly terminated their new domain, not far from where they might have expected to find the important village of Memancharoy, but of this, too, there was now no trace. I had quite reckoned upon a supper and a bed at Orleansville tonight, said Servadac, as, full of despondency, he surveyed the waste of water. Quite impossible, replied Ben Zoof, except you had gone by a boat. But cheer up, sir, cheer up. We will soon devise some means for getting across to one. Amazing stories. If, as I hope, rejoined the captain, we are on a peninsula, we are more likely to get to Thames. There we shall hear the news. Far more likely to carry the news ourselves, answered Ben Zoof, as he threw himself down for his night's rest. 6 hours later, only waiting for sunrise, Captain Servadac set himself in movement again to renew his investigations. At this spot the shore, that hitherto had been running in a southeasterly direction, turned abruptly to the north, being no longer formed by the natural bank of the Shelif, but consisting of an absolutely new coastline. No land was in sight. Nothing could be seen of Orleansville, which ought to have been about 6 miles to the southwest, and Ben Zoof, who had mounted their highest point of view attainable, could distinguish sea, and nothing but sea, to the farthest horizon. Quitting their encampment and riding on, their bewildered explorers kept close to the new shore. This, since it had ceased to be formed by the Origi Nile river bank, had considerably altered its aspect. Frequent landslips occurred, and in many places deep chasms rifted the ground, great gaps furrowed the fields, and trees, half uprooted, overhung their water, remarkable by the fantastic distortions of their gnarled trunks, looking as though they had been chopped by a hatchet. The sinuosities of the coastline, alternately gully and headland, had the effect of making a devious progress for the travelers, and at sunset, although they had accomplished more than 20 miles, they had only just arrived at the foot of the Mountains, which, before the cataclysm, had formed the extremity of the chain of the Little Atlas. The ridge, however, had been violently ruptured, and now rose perpendicularly from the water. On the following morning Servadac and Ben Zoof traversed one of the mountain gorges, and next, in order to make a more thorough acquaintance with the limits and condition of the section of Algerian territory of which they seemed to be left as the sole occupants, they dismounted, and proceeded on foot to the summit of one of the highest peaks. From this elevation they ascertained that from the base of the Murdia to the Mediterranean, a distance of about 18 miles, a new coastline had come into existence. No land was visible in any direction. No isthmus existed to form a connecting link with the territory of Thames, which had entirely disappeared. appeared. The result was that Captain Servadac was driven to the irresistible conclusion that the tract of land which he had been surveying was not, as he had at first imagined, a peninsula. It was actually an island. Strictly generally speaking, this island was quadrilateral, but the sides were so irregular that it was much more nearly a triangle. The comparison of their sides exhibiting these proportions, the section of the right bank of the Shelif, 72 miles, their southern boundary from the Shelif to the chain of the Little Atlas, 21 miles, from the Little Atlas to the Mediterranean, 18 miles, and 60 miles of the shore of the Mediterranean itself, making in all an entire circumference of about 171 miles. "What does it all mean?" exclaimed the captain, every hour growing more and more bewildered. "The will of Providence, and we must submit," replied Ben-Zoof, calm and undisturbed. With this reflection, the two men silently descended their mountain and remounted their horses. Before evening they had reached the Mediterranean. On their road they failed to discern a vestige of the little town of Montenot, like tens, of which not so much as a ruined cottage was visible on the horizon. It seemed to be annihilated. On the following day, the 6th of January, their two men made a forced march along the coast of the Mediterranean, which they found less altered than the captain had at first supposed, but 4 villages had entirely disappeared, and the headlands, unable to resist the shock of the convulsion, had been detached from the mainland. The circuit of the island had been now completed, and the explorers, after a period of 60 hours, found themselves once more beside the ruins of their Gorby. 5 days, or what, according to the established order of things, would have been 2 days and a half, had been occupied in tracing their boundaries of their new domain, and they had ascertained beyond a doubt that they were the sole human inhabitants left upon the island. "Well, sir, here you are, Governor-General of Algeria," exclaimed Ben-Zoof, as they reached their Gorby. "With not a soul to govern," gloomily rejoined the captain. "How so? Do you not reckon me?" "Sure. Ben-Zoof, what are you?" "What am one?" "Why, I am the population." The captain deigned no reply, but, muttering some expressions of regret for the fruitless trouble he had taken about his rondo, betook himself to rest. Chapter 7. Ben-Zoof watches in vain. In a few minutes the Governor-General and his population were asleep. The Gorby being in ruins, they were obliged to put up with the best accommodation they could find in the adjacent erection. It must be owned that the captain's slumbers were by no means sound. He was agitated by the consciousness that he had hitherto been unable to account for his strange experiences by any reasonable theory. Though far from being advanced in their knowledge of natural philosophy, he had been instructed, to a certain degree, in its elementary principles, and, by an effort of memory, he managed to recall some general laws which he had almost forgotten. He could understand that an altered inclination of the Earth's axis with regard to the ecliptic would introduce a change of position in the cardinal points, and bring about a displacement of the sea, but the hypothesis entirely failed to account, either for the shortening of the days, or for the diminution in the pressure of the atmosphere. He felt that his judgment was utterly baffled. His only remaining hope was that the chain of marvels was not yet complete, and that some thing farther might throw some light upon their mystery. Ben-Zoof's first care on the following morning was to provide a good breakfast. To use his own phrase, he was as hungry as the whole population of 3 million Algerians, of whom he was the off on a comet is representative, and he must have enough to eat. The catastrophe which had overwhelmed the country had left a dozen ego uninjured, and upon these, with a good dish of his famous couscous, he hoped that he and his master might have a sufficiently substantial meal. The stove was ready for use. Their copper skillet was as bright as hands could make it, and the beads of condensed steam upon the azure face of a large stone alcaraza gave evidence that it was supplied with water. Ben-Zoof at once lighted a fire, singing all the time, according to his wont, a snatch of an old military refrain. Ever on the lookout for fresh phenomena, Captain Servadac watched the preparations with a curious eye. It struck him that perhaps the air, in its strangely modified condition, would fail to supply sufficient oxygen, and that the stove in consequence might not fulfill its function. But no, the fire was lighted just as usual, and fanned into vigor by Ben-Zoof applying his mouth in lieu of bellows, and a bright flame started up from the midst of the twigs and coal. The skillet was duly set upon the stove, and Ben-Zoof was prepared to wait a while for the water to boil. Taking up the eggs, he was surprised to notice that they hardly weighed more than they would if they had been mere shells, but he was still more surprised when he saw that before the water had been 2 minutes over the fire it was at full boil. "By Jingo!" he exclaimed, "a precious hot fire." Servadac reflected. "It cannot be that the fire is hotter," he said. "The peculiarity must be in there water." And taking down a centigrade thermometer, which hung upon the wall, he plunged it into the skillet. Instead of 100 degrees, the instrument registered only 66 degrees. "Take my advice, Ben-Zoof," he said, "leave your eggs in the saucepan a good quarter of an hour. Boil them hard." "That will never do," objected the orderly. "You will not find them hard, my good fellow. Trust me, we shall be able to dip our sippets into the yolks easily enough." The captain was quite right in his conjecture, that this new phenomenon was caused by a diminution in the pressure of the atmosphere. Water boiling at a temperature of 66 degrees was itself an evidence that the ocean of air above the Earth's surface had been reduced by 1/3 of its quantity. The identical phenomenon would have occurred at the summit of a mountain 35,000 feet high, and had Servadac been in possession of a barometer, he would have immediately discovered the fact that only now for the first time, as the result of experiment, revealed itself to him, a fact, moreover, which accounted for the effect upon the blood vessels which both he and Ben-Zoof had experienced, as well as for the attenuation of their voices and their accelerated breathing. And yet, he agreed with himself, if our encampment has been projected to so great an elevation, how is it that their sea remains at its proper level? Once again Hector Servadac, though capable of tracing consequences, felt himself totally at a loss to comprehend their cause, hence his agitation and bewilderment. After their prolonged immersion in the boiling water, the eggs were found to be only just sufficiently cooked, the couscous was very much in their same condition, and Ben-Zoof came to the conclusion sign that in future he must be careful to commence his culinary operations an hour earlier. He was 3. Rejoiced at last to help his master, who, in spite of his perplexed preoccupation, seemed to have a very fair appetite for breakfast. "Well, Captain?" said Ben Zoof presently, such being his ordinary way of opening conversation. "Vile, Ben Zoof," was the captain's invariable response to his servant's formula. "What are we to do now, sir?" "We can only for the present wait patiently where we are. We are encamped upon an island, and therefore we can only be rescued by sea. But do you suppose that any of our friends are still alive?" asked Ben Zoof. "Oh, I think we must indulge the hope that this catastrophe has not extended far. We must trust that it has limited its mischief to some small portion of the Algerian coast, and that our friends are all alive and well. No doubt the Governor-General will be anxious to investigate the full extent of the damage, and will send a vessel from Algiers to explore. It is not likely that we shall be forgotten. What you have to do then, Ben Zoof, is to keep a sharp lookout, and to be ready, in case a vessel should appear, to make signals at once. But if no vessel should appear, sighed there orderly, then we must build a boat, and go in search of those who do not come in search of us." "Very good. But what sort of a sailor are you?" "Everyone can be a sailor when he must," said Servadac calmly. Ben Zoof said no more. For several succeeding days he scanned the horizon unintermittently with his telescope. His watching was in vain. No ship appeared upon the desert sea. By the name of A. Kabyle, he broke out impatiently, "His Excellency is grossly negliged t. Although the days and nights had become reduced from 24 hours to 12, Captain Servadac would not accept the new condition of things, but resolved to adhere to the computations of their old calendar, notwithstanding, therefore, that their sun had risen and set 12 times since the commencement of the new year. He persisted in calling. The following day, the 6th of January, his watch enabled him to keep an accurate account of their passing hours. In the course of his life, Ben Zoof had read a few books. After pondering one day, he said, "It seems to me, Captain, that you have turned into Robinson Crusoe, and that I am your man Friday. I hope I have not become a Negro." "No," replied the captain. "Your complexion isn't the fairest in the world, but you are not black yet." "Well, I had much sooner be a white Friday Thury." "A black one," rejoined Ben Zoof. Still no ship appeared, and Captain Servadac, after the example of all previous Crusoes, began to consider it advisable to investigate the resources of his domain, the new territory of which he had become the monarch he named Gourbi Island. It had a superficial area of about 900 square miles. Bullocks, cows, goats, and sheep existed in considerable numbers, and as there seemed already to be an abundance of game, it was hardly likely 16 amazing stories that a future supply would effeel them. The condition of the cereals was such as to promise a fine ingath herring of wheat, maize, and rice, so that for the governor and his population, with their 2 horses, not only was there ample provision, but even if other human inhabitants besides themselves should yet be discovered, there was not the remotest prospect of any of them perishing by starvation. From the 6th to the 13th of January the rain came down in torrents, and, what was quite an unusual occurrence at this season of the year, several heavy storms broke over the island. In spite, however, of the continual downfall, the heavens still remained veiled in cloud. Servadac, moreover, did not fail to observe that for the season the temperature was unusually high, and, as a matter still more surprising, that it kept steadily increasing, as though the earth were gradually and continuously approximating to the sun. In proportion to the rise of temperature, the light also assumed greater intensity, and if it had not been for the screen of vapor interposed between the sky and the island, the irradiation which would have illumined all terrestrial objects would have been vivid beyond all precedent. But neither sun, moon, nor star ever appeared. And Servadac's irritation and annoyance at being unable to identify any one point of the firmament may be more readily imagined than described. On one occasion Ben-Zoof endeavored to mitigate his master's impatience by exhorting him to assume the resignation, even if he did not feel the indifference which he himself experienced, but his advice was received with so angry a rebuff that he retired in all haste, abashed, to resume his watchman's duty, which he performed with exemplary perseverance, day and night, with the shortest possible intervals of rest. Despite wind, rain, and storm, he mounted guard upon the cliff, but all in vain. Not a speck appeared upon the desolate horizon. To say the truth, no vessel could have stood against the weather. The hurricane raged with tremendous fury, and the waves rose to a height that seemed to defy calculation. Never, even in the second era of creation, when, under the influence of internal heat, the waters rose in vapor to descend in deluge back upon the world, could meteorological phenomena have been developed with more impressive intensity. But by the night of the 13th the tempest appeared to have spent its fury, the wind dropped, the rain ceased as if by a spell, and Servadac, who for their last 6 days had confined himself to the shelter of his roof, hastened to join Ben-Zoof at his post upon the cliff. Now, he thought, there might be a chance of solving his perplexity. Perhaps now the huge disk, of which he had an imperfect glimpse on the night of the 31st of December, might again reveal itself. At any rate, he hoped for an opportunity of observing the constellations in a clear firmament above. The night was magnificent. Not a cloud dimmed the luster of the stars, which spangled the heavens in surpassing brilliancy, and several nebulae which hitherto no astronomer had been able to discern without the aid of a telescope were clearly visible to the naked eye. By a natural impulse, Servadac's first thought was to observe the position of the pole star. It was in sight, but so near to the horizon as to suggest the utter impossibility of its being any longer the central pivot of the sidereal system. It occupied a position through which it was out of the question that the axis of the Earth, indefinitely prolonged, could ever pass. In his impression he was more thoroughly confirmed when, an hour later, he noticed that the star had approached still nearer their horizon, as though it had belonged to one of their zodiacal constellations. The pole star being manifestly through 3 displaced, it remained to be discovered whether any other of their celestial bodies had become a fixed center around which the constellations made their apparent daily revolutions. To the solution of this problem Sir Vadak applied himself with the most thoughtful diligence. After patient observation, he satisfied himself that the required conditions were answered by a certain star that was stationary not far from the horizon. This was Vega, in the constellation Lyra, a star which, according to the precession of the equinoxes, will take the place of our pole star 12.000 years hence. The most daring imagination could not suppose that a period of 12,000 years had been crowded into the space of a fortnight, and therefore the captain came, as to an easier conclusion, to the opinion that the Earth's axis had been suddenly and immensely shifted, and from the fact that the axis, if produced, would pass through a point so little removed above the horizon, he deduced the inference that the Mediterranean must have been transported to the equator. Lost in bewildering maze of thought, he gazed long and intently upon the heavens. His eyes cleared from where the tail of the Great Bear, now a zodiacal constellation, was scarcely visible above the waters, to where the stars of the southern hemisphere were just breaking on his view. A cry from Ben-Zoof recalled Bim to himself. "The moon!" shouted the orderly, as though overjoyed at once again beholding what the poet has called the kind companion of terrestrial night. And he pointed to a disk that was rising at a spot precisely opposite the place where they would have expected to see the sun. "The moon!" again he cried. But Captain Servadac could not altogether enter into his servant's enthusiasm. If this were actually the moon, her distance from the earth must have been increased by some millions of miles. He was rather disposed to suspect that it was not the Earth's satellite at all, but some planet with its apparent magnitude greatly enlarged by its approximation to the Earth. Taking up the powerful field glass, which he was accustomed to use in his surveying operations, he proceeded to investigate more fully the luminous orb. But he failed to trace any of the lineaments, supposed to resemble a human face, that mark the lunar surface. He failed to decipher any indications of hill and plain, nor could he make out the aureole of light which emanates from what astronomers have designated Mount Tycho. "It is not the moon," he said slowly. "Not the moon?" cried Ben-Zoof. "Why not?" "It is not the moon," again affirmed the captain. "Why not?" repeated Ben-Zoof, unwilling to renounce his first impression. "Off on a comet." 17. Because there is a small satellite in attendance. And the captain drew his servant's attention to a bright speck, apparently about the size of one of Jupiter's satellites seen through a moderate telescope, that was clearly visible just within the focus of his glass. Here, then, was a fresh mystery. The orbit of this planet was assuredly interior to the orbit of the Earth, because it accompanied the Sun in its apparent motion, yet it was neither Mercury nor Venus, because neither one nor the other of these has any satellite at all. The captain stamped and stamped again with mingled vexation, agitation, and bewilderment. "Confound it!" he cried, "if this is neither Venus nor Mercury, it must be the moon. But if it is the moon, whence, in the name of all the gods, has she picked up another moon for herself?" The captain was in dire perplexity. That was our show, and thank you all at VidMe. Thanks to Frater S. Agent God.